districts to check their levies. This past biennium, the Association of Minnesota Counties and the League of Minnesota Cities asked us, as part of our resolution of the $5+ billion shortfall that we had, to take away the local government aid and the aid that goes to counties, because legislatures were not living up to the promise that had been made back in 2002 when this program was designed. So they actually pushed ahead on that issue. So in response, the legislature created what's called a market value exclusion. The exclusion then is geared for the middle class, and it helps reduce the property tax on homestead. That is what you see on your tax statement when you receive it instead of a credit now. Remember, a credit was a subsidy. And so the signal that the League of Minnesota Cities and the Association of Minnesota Counties wanted to send to the legislature was, if you can't keep your promises, we don't want this subsidy. We want then our local governments to learn to function on what they have. And they're going to have to tell the people then that they're going to increase the levy if that's necessary.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. Sandra, you'll go first on this one for a 3-minute answer. The question reads, a federal investigation is underway of Minnesota's Medicaid program payments and the Department of Human Services. Reports indicate that there seemed to have been financial mismanagement of the program and DHS collusion with the HMOs that have managed the state's healthcare programs for nearly 20 years. Over $3 billion taxpayer dollars go each year into these programs in Minnesota. What needs to be done at the state level in the way of obtaining independent outside audits of the HMOs, and how far back should these audits go? 3-minute answer.
Well, unfortunately, the audit that passed in the legislature doesn't kick in until 2014. So those years that HMOs were making money off the taxpayers of Minnesota have been left in limbo. But I'm going to work very hard with Representative Gottwald and Representative Lane, who I believe will be a senator after the election, to ensure that we are doing a look back as well. I would never have favored the organization of a health maintenance organization 20 years ago, because it is not as accountable. It cannot be held as accountable as other programs in the state, because there is the management by these big insurance companies, and I don't fault them, but it's that we lost track as Minnesotans of what might have been happening to us as we were part of HMOs. Now, HMOs are nonprofits. They have to be nonprofits in Minnesota. When that legislation passed 20 years ago, except for Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is also for-profit, anyone participating in an HMO had to be a nonprofit. And I know that UCARE has returned dollars to the state. But it is a travesty when we have health care insurance that is being used to benefit a nonprofit such as those that participate in HMOs. So the accountability and transparency has to be reinstated, and I am in full agreement that this investigation must proceed, and that we need a look back at what was happening during those years, so that if we should be reimbursed, not just as a state, but as individual participants, that will occur on a timely basis, and it will occur because we have found out that there might have been mismanagement going on. Certainly, fraud in government can become something that we have to pay more attention to, because remember, government in any state, and Minnesota as well, is huge. And in Minnesota, we have $34 billion budget. Of that, in health and human services, we're spending with federal dollars almost as much as we spend on education. $13 billion. Education spends $14 billion over 2 years. So when you have a system that has grown so large, and then you have interaction with health maintenance organizations that might have been skimming off part of the premium to service the constituency, we have a real problem, and therefore an investigation must proceed, a look back must occur, and we'll work at that in the next session.
Thank you. Our time is up. Joe, the same question for you. It's a 3-minute answer, and the question reads, a federal investigation is underway of Minnesota's Medicaid program payments and the Department of Human Services. Reports indicate that there seems to have been financial mismanagement of the program and DHS collusion with the HMOs that have managed the state's health care programs for nearly 20 years. Over $3 billion taxpayer dollars per year go to these programs in Minnesota. What needs to be done at the state level in the way of obtaining independent outside audits of the HMOs, and how far back should these audits go? 3 minutes.
Let's be very clear here. This is not a case of government fraud. This is a case of government allowing private companies to run wild. The HMOs managing our public health systems was always supposed to be a pilot program, and it kept getting reinstated, and Representative Erickson was in office for 7 of the 8 terms during which we've been kicking this can down the road. To get my answer to the question out of the way, yes, we need an audit. Yes, it needs to be retroactive. We need to go back and look at how many hundreds of millions of dollars or more have been essentially stolen from our state revenues by private insurance companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield, UCare, companies like that. It's very interesting to me that a few years ago, when we first started talking, when groups like the 7 County Senior Federation first started talking about an audit, UCare voluntarily gave $30 million to the state of Minnesota. Now, I don't know about you, but I haven't heard of people just giving $30 million to the state of Minnesota before. And that's probably the single biggest evidence that we have a problem. There's some fraud going on. And we need to recoup some of that money, given that companies are just voluntarily paying it in the hopes of convincing the state not to do that audit. The statistics show that what they've essentially done is overcharged what they thought someone would spend on health care in a year, and continued every year to increase their reserves, regardless of whether or not they need it. So we don't know right now whether their reserves are $100 million or $1 billion, because they won't let us into their books, because they're private companies. So this is a perfect example of a situation where private companies have caused a mess, and it's only government, elected by the people, to solve the people's problems that can get us out. So I think that's important to recognize here, that government isn't the problem in this circumstance. The problem is government's inaction, government's unwillingness to start and finish the program that they started with the public health systems, passing the buck on to the private sector. And in this case, privatization has cost the state very dearly, and could be a big part of the reason we had a $5 billion deficit last year, and are going to have about a $4 billion deficit when the next legislature goes in. So I think that could be a part of the solution, fixing our deficit, getting those retroactive monies back.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. Joe, you'll go first with this one. It's a 2-minute answer. And the question reads, there is a constitutional amendment on the ballot this year regarding voter identification. What is your view of this issue, both from a policy perspective and a practical perspective? 2 minutes.
Well, I'm sure we all remember after the economic collapse of 2008 and 2009 that when we elected our legislators in 2010, we sent a really clear message that jobs and the economy were our #1 priority. Of course, what we have now are 2 constitutional amendments that took up a great deal of time of the last legislature. And frankly, I think it's a distraction from jobs and the economy. I don't think it's something that we wanted our legislators to be focused on. It's not a priority. But getting to the actual meat of the voter restriction amendment, what you have here is an unfunded mandate. Nobody knows how much this voter ID system is going to cost. Some estimates seem to suggest about $50 million statewide. A lot of counties have been coming out. Ramsey County came out and said it's going to cost us, I think it was about $1 million. But it's not going to be free. The state's going to be obligated to provide free IDs, and the state's going to have to provide more detailed training for poll workers and provide more poll workers. There is another option, and it's an electronic poll book. An electronic poll book would be cheaper. It would enable people to not have IDs because we would have essentially people's pictures saved in the electronic poll book so that we could tell by verification with the poll book whether that was the person that was voting. And even if we have voter ID, it's not going to stop the only documented problem we've ever had with voter fraud in Minnesota, which is the allegations of felons voting. Because it doesn't say on your driver's license whether or not you're a felon. So the bottom line is this was a distraction. The legislature should have been focused on more important issues, and this is a solution in search of a problem.
Thank you. Sandra, the same question with a 2-minute answer. There is a constitutional amendment on the ballot this year regarding voter identification. What is your view of the issue, both from a policy perspective and a practical perspective?
Voter ID has been around at the legislature since 2000. In 2000, I was the author of identification required for tribal members. The Blacks Band, among other tribes, came to us and asked us to provide some kind of identification for tribal members when they're casting their ballots. So that was coupled with a regular photo ID, so that we could have a match going on, so that it wasn't just tribal members who had photo IDs or identification cards to show at the polls, but also other folks, all voters, in fact. So that moved through the legislature that biennium, and all that survived was the tribal ID. And that now does include a photo, because tribes have discovered that because they have members coming in and out of their tribal land, they want for their per capita payments a photo identification. So this is not a new issue, and it didn't consume very much time at all at the legislature when you think about the amount of time that we spend debating many, many issues. I believe that it's an important piece for integrity in voting. It is not going to be costly. A recent report showed that the first year about a $2 million cost, and thereafter that will be reduced. But we need photo identification for almost everything we do today. And so if we're going to be able to do the thing that we love the most, and that's to cast our ballot on election day, then I think it stands to reason that we want to show our identification. In fact, I always show my identification when I go to the polls.
Thank you. Our time is up. Got a couple questions. We have a couple of questions from our guests in the audience. And Tim, before you go, did we decide 1 minute? 1 minute each. Great. We have 2 questions from our audience, 1 minute each. Sandra, you'll go first with this first question. The question is, would you favor a Minnesota constitutional amendment that would require a super majority to make an amendment to the Minnesota Constitution? 1 minute.
You know, I'd have to listen to the debate before I knew whether I would support a supermajority. You know, constitutional amendments come up all the time. This year, in fact, this biennium, I think the Democrats introduced about 30 constitutional amendments, and the Republicans about the same number. So every biennium, constitutional amendments are introduced. It's been going on forever. And I would think that there would be a great deal of angst on the other side of the aisle, on Joe Walsh's side of the aisle, if the supermajority were required, because Democrats like to introduce constitutional amendments as much as Republicans do. And that probably is at the heart of some of the issues that come before the legislature, because there's always something that legislators have heard from their constituency that should be in the Constitution.
What time is it? Joe, the same question, 1 minute answer. Would you favor a Minnesota constitutional amendment that would require a supermajority to make an amendment to the Minnesota Constitution?
You know, I don't think I would. What that would do is essentially freeze the Constitution in whatever state it currently is in And the fact that we've had a constitutional amendment system that, by and large, has worked. It hasn't been extraordinarily abused over its history. Certainly in the past couple of decades, there haven't been, 2 constitutional amendments on every ballot. This is certainly an unusual year.